So serious, right? I feel like it's like a meme moment.
It's like, yeah, it seems like a meme moment. Everyone's like taking pictures.
We will get started when the door
You know, the door shuts.
Yeah, we're good, we're good.
We're good, we're good. I mean, you can let people in the back for standing. It's all good.
And if they want to sing. Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
How are you guys?
Hungry.
Hungry? I heard hungry. How are you hungry? It's like a
breakfast.
Is there like, is that an open seat there? Is there? Somebody's sitting? Okay, they're probably just in the bathroom. Okay, good. All right, well, welcome to the CTI 101 class, or workshop, or whatever. What is this, a workshop or a class?
That's a good time.
A good time. So who here is actually familiar with CTI? Like, raise your hand if you know what CTI is and have like done something with CTI. Okay, that's good. So like, what have you guys done with CTI? Just so we.
Mostly focused on PTPs, IOCs for recorded future. Now with Wave, dark web monitoring, threat intel, researching on open source for vulnerabilities of companies on what systems they're using.
Okay.
So Shodan kind of stuff.
Shodan and Census.
Okay, so yeah, you're doing quite a bit. Like,
Yeah.
So you're,
You can leave.
Yeah.
Come back next year.
This is seriously like a legit 101 class. Like, it's going to be stuff that like, if you've never heard about CTI is going to be completely brand new to you. So you're more than welcome to stay, obviously, but you know, if you feel like it's getting kind of boring because you've been here before, then by all means. What about you? What have you done with CTI?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm gonna copy his.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. So I guess the same applies. And I think there was somebody over here. What name?
Yeah, you know.
You said you did CTI before?
Yeah, same with those guys that they use the open source tool called MES.
Yeah.
Very good.
For aggregation? Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, so you four probably are going to be somewhat bored. The rest of you, it should be completely new information. It should be interesting. Like, I guess my question to those that are unfamiliar with CTI is what brought you to this class? Like, why did you decide to participate here? And don't be shy. This is a safe space.
Yep.
We're all friends.
Yep. Nobody's gonna judge
No
you.
wrong answers.
Yep.
It's all cool. Yeah, please.
It's more for being a boutique. Supposed to be, best landscape.
Yep.
So it's very important.
Okay. So understanding the threat landscape, part of your day-to-day job. Anyone else? Why are you interested in learning about CTI? Come on. Don't be shy.
Sure, come on, that's cool.
It's not part of my current position, but it's definitely something I'm interested in. I do a lot of vulnerability side of the house, breaking, pen testing, and even some vulnerability research. So knowing the actual threat intel that I should be looking at for my company specifically is something that is very interesting to me, and how to get better at some of those holistic, getting the whole picture of that thing.
Okay. That's good. That's good. All right, one more from this side of the room. Seeing as you guys are like the shyest side of the room. The shy side of the room. So this is the shy side of the room. This is like the talkative side of the room. So everyone's like, I'm shy.
Oh, her name is. So we're just referring to you.
So yeah, somebody from this side of the room.
Shy's on through.
Oh, so Shy's not actually that shy.
I wanted to know the foundation also, the foundation, how CTI and its framework, on how, as a CTI analyst, I want to be CTI analyst in the future, what should I know?
Okay, that's great. Yeah, what should you know if you want to be a CTI analyst? All right, well then this is like the right course for you. Yeah, because this will give you like our goal today is to just give you some foundational knowledge on cyber threat intel and what cyber threat intel is all about, background, some definitions, terms, et cetera, and go through some use cases and stuff like that. So I think we have, what, 2 hours, right?
2 hours.
Until 10:30?
Yeah.
So, just a little administrative note. This is not like elementary school. You need to go to the bathroom and leave. We're all adults here. Just walk out and take care of whatever you need to take care of.
If you're bored, you can also leave.
And if you're bored, you can also leave.
It's fine.
If you see somebody, if you guys in the back see somebody leave and they're not coming back, by all means, take their seat. You don't need to be standing for all 2 hours if there's an open seat. All right, with that, I guess we can kind of more or less get started.
Wait, do you guys know who we are?
That's what I was going to say.
I mean, just in case you weren't there, like, I mean, you were probably there for him
I was
yesterday.
just going to do the intro, like,
Okay,
who I
good.
am, and then turn it over to you. So, yeah, I guess if you didn't see it out yesterday, I'm Scott. I think this is it's my second in-person RuCon. I did a RuCon virtually during
COVID, right?
during COVID. And I live in Tokyo. Used to work I exited CrowdStrike prior to July 19th, so I got to sit on the sidelines. Yeah, I got to sit on the sidelines and laugh at everyone. So
And me specifically.
and you specifically. And actually, I was on the Today Show in Australia talking smack about CrowdStrike, so that was kind of fun. But yeah, I did 6 years, a little under 6 years with CrowdStrike, 6 years with McAfee, and a little under 25 years with the U.S. government. Entire adult life based in Japan, although I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. And so we have very complementary backgrounds. I'm actually, by trade, I guess, if you will, I'm more of a cybersecurity guy who used to leverage Intel as a consumer, not a practitioner, but as a consumer. So, like you guys were talking about using, like tools like Reporter Future, et cetera. So I was a consumer of it when I worked for the U.S. government. And then I also tried to sell it when I worked at McAfee, and that's all I did at CrowdStrike was sell threat intel. And here I am. And
Wait, you want to talk about the exciting thing?
oh yeah, you mean
His claim to fame, his actual claim to fame. Like, that's the reason why Scott is so popular today.
I don't know about that. Does anyone know who I am outside of the CrowdStrike piece?
They usually want
Usually for whatever, you don't count.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, in the Philippines, like a lot of people
Clearly not in this room.
somehow know my name, but yeah, clearly not in this room, which is good. Because I usually don't talk about it. So I'll let you talk about it. I mean, you brought it up.
No, you got to talk about it.
All right, anyone know the website DeviantArt? All right, so I'm one of the original co-founders of DeviantArt. I came up with the name, I came up with the branding. Yeah, first 3 versions of DeviantArt were all me. So yeah, back in the day. No, completely unnecessary. Thank you, but completely unnecessary.
High school days.
So, and then I guess I should mention the reason why everything's purple on the screen and the prayers is because when I exited CrowdStrike, I decided to do a startup, kind of do my own thing, take a leap of faith, and now have a cyber threat intel-based startup that is currently in development. So, yeah, we'll see how things work out. So that's me. Nice to meet all of you, and looking forward to a fun 2 hours. Over to you, man.
Aaron, you might have seen me yesterday afternoon, but usually at the time of the day, 50% of the folks are at the CTF, 30% of the folks are somewhere else, and then the 20% are in the room, right? So, Aaron, I think it's my 4th RuCon. I've been here like 4 years in a row now. Originally from Singapore, no longer live in Singapore, I live in the Middle East now. I live in Dubai. I've been there for 2 years now. I'm still at CrowdStrike, hence the blue screen. You saw my presentation yesterday, and July 19th will be a very special day in my heart for a very long time to come. I was actually on a funny story was I was actually about to fly to Saudi Arabia when the news came, and then my phone started exploding, and then I just used the excuse that I got a long flight ahead, and don't call me until you can reach me. So I was like safe for like the next 3 hours, then after that I died for the next like 12. So, but that was good times. Personally, I am like just to speak to my background and just to address the point about what Scott mentioned about how our backgrounds are complementary. So Scott was basically a security guy, like applying intelligence. I am the other side of the coin. I started my career as an intelligence person. So if you know a thing or two about me, I started off as a military intelligence officer. I did, the covert discipline, so I did signals intelligence, I did imagery intelligence, spaceborne systems, ground-based systems, all the cross-domain sensors, I'm familiar with them. And it was focused very specifically on traditional intelligence, so we were collecting on targets that I cannot talk about, but you can make an educated guess on what kind of targets we were collecting on. My claim to fame in the close community was when our dear friends up north decided to grab our armored vehicles off the port. I was actually the intelligence commanding officer to basically find where the ship was and track the ship for the next. It was from Boxing Day of 2016 all the way through to Chinese New Year of 2017. So that 3 weeks of my life, I gave it to the country, I guess. Yeah, but thankfully, like the ship. Oh no! So, you don't know about this, okay? Like within these 4 walls, just I get shot. So
It's apparently on video land too.
Oh shit! I guess too late. But anyway, it's what 2016, a long time ago. So I did traditional intelligence. Then I was when Singapore decided that cyber was a thing and they wanted to build a cyber command. As most of you guys would expect, cybersecurity. The genesis has a lot to do with intelligence, right? And it's really just some would say it's just the next iteration of signals intelligence. So because of the nexus, I was asked to help build the cyber command. So when I joined the cyber command, there were like 5 of us, and then when I left, like 2.5 years later, there were like 300, and right now it's like 6,000 people. So it's amazing. It was an amazing journey, and I left like 6 years ago, and I've just been in the private sector. So funny that you brought up Recorded Future, because I was one of the first Recorded Future employees in the region. Started one of the business units for them. Did that for about 2 years. Got bored. Yeah, in Singapore. And I got bored, and I left for CrowdStrike, and I've been at CrowdStrike for the last 4. Spent the first 2 in Singapore. Spent the next 2 in Dubai, and you can make an educated guess on like where my part is in this thing. But I can't say anymore because I'm still at CrowdStrike. So that's me, and I think just one caveat and something just to kind of add on to the context of this session or training today. We kind of approach this with the notion that the vast majority of the participants today, first and foremost, know close to nothing about cyber threat intelligence, hence the 101. But the second important point is also that we recognize, in our time working in the CTI space, that when most of the folks that are in CTI today or looking to start a career in CTI often have a very security-oriented focus, or earlier part of their career was very focused on cybersecurity. Right? You see a lot of SOC analysts, incident responders that want to become a CTI analyst. Because of that, we are a function of our previous earlier experiences. The view on CTI actually takes on quite a strong bias towards cybersecurity, which is good, right? But I think what we're trying to also bring across, one of the core messages they want to bring across during today's session is that there is also an intelligence side of things, right? There is an intelligence-centric lens when it comes to CTI. So we're going to try to show you today where it all comes together, right? What are some of the intelligence-focused methodologies and processes that are relevant in CTI, and then also in the context of cybersecurity, right? What's the role of intelligence, which is basically CTI? So we're going to do both today. Sounds good? So I think let's keep this conversation as open one as possible. So as we go along throughout this session, please stop us anytime with any questions. Just I think it will be a lot more fun and a lot more engaging if we treat this as an open conversation. So if you're good to go, let's go, Scott.
All right, let's get started. And yeah, if you do have questions, just raise your hand. We'll, just entertain any questions. Wow, that's awesome. This just decided to stop working. Gotta love it. It's like a foot away. What is going on today? All right, maybe it doesn't want to work at all.
Try that again.
That was interesting.
Try it again.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, it works.
Now it's working. All right, so this is what we're going to go over the next hour and 45 minutes or so, wherever we're at. And we're going to just break it up between us. So, yeah, we'll randomly stop and
randomly start.
So let's just dive right into the first section and just get kicked off with, why does threat intelligence matter? Some of you that are already using threat intelligence obviously understand why intelligence matters. But and even though this deck is a prairie deck, and we're kind of coming at this from a different lens, the phrase that's on the screen is actually something that was coined by CrowdStrike. And actually, I think it's important to understand now more than ever. And it resonates, I think, really well, because maybe, a decade ago, focusing on a piece of malware was important. But nowadays, focusing on just a piece of malware, you're only looking at a small pinhole in a much larger picture. You think about a puzzle, you're maybe only looking at a single puzzle piece when you just focus on a piece of malware or a single TTP or a single IOC. You really need to understand the adversary that's behind the attack in order to really get that clear picture on what exactly is taking place. And this is why threat intelligence is so important. Because those adversary profiles, the write-ups on the different attacks that you're potentially reading about in the news, the information that's coming out from like CISA in the USA, NCSC in, say, the UK, et cetera, that's all intelligence-based information. It may not necessarily read like intelligence, but it's all based on intelligence. And we're going to kind of take you through the journey of how you get from nothing to intelligence, to like an intelligence report. How was that? Is the room about to explode?
Put some devices in place.
All right, so like one of the things that we often preach when we're talking about the use of cyber threat intelligence is this notion of intelligence-led security. If you use intelligence to make security-based decisions, you're going to, at the end of the day, increase the resilience of your network, increase the security posture of your network, and make it that much more difficult for an adversary to successfully attack you. The key here is that you and the adversary, like when I say you, I'm referring to your organizations. Your organizations that you represent and work at and the adversaries are intertwined, whether you want to believe it or not, that you absolutely are. Whatever you're working for, whether it's a financial institution, a manufacturing company, a telco, healthcare, you have something that the adversary wants. And we'll go through that on this next slide. So if we look at this from kind of the lens of strategic layer, operational layer, and a tactical layer, this is how you can kind of really understand where the adversary and you are intertwined. At like that 30,000 foot strategic view, this is like where the adversary starts thinking, well, I want to target healthcare because of X, or I want to target FSI, the financial sector, because of Y. Or maybe it's I want to target this particular organization because they're in a specific country. Like maybe there's a reason why an adversary would want to target, say, a telco, for example, based here in the Philippines, geographical. So at the strategic layer, on the victim side of the house, or the target side of the house, you have some potential intellectual property, or maybe it's just money. So you have some kind of asset that the adversary wants. Also the industry you operate in, is, as I mentioned, and then the geography. On the adversary side of the house, it's all about, potentially it could be geopolitics, if we're talking about nation states that are wanting to target either an industry or a geography or specific assets. It could be geopolitical, so nation state kind of thought process. But also about motive and intent. Like, is there a motivation to attack a particular industry or a particular geography, or to go after particular assets? So like, what's the motivation behind it? And then is there actual intent to conduct the attack, right? Motive and intent sound similar, but they're actually, different. You can be motivated to do something, but you may just like sit back and go like, it's too hard. I don't want to do it. Or you can like just be like, hoorah, I'm going to attack. I have the motivation, I have the capability, and I have the wherewithal to actually conduct the attack. So kind of think about, the difference between motive and intent. They're not the same. There's a slight nuance difference there. So that's at the strategic layer. At the operational layer, this is where you kind of get down to the people, process, and technology component of your organizations that you represent. People, as we all know, are the weakest link in the chain, as we often talk about. Somebody is going to click that spear phishing or phishing email, right? Somebody's going to click it, whether it's clicking a link to go to some nefarious website, whether it's opening the malicious PowerPoint or PDF attachment. That's a people part of the equation, right? There's also the processes, right, that are in place in your organizations that are potentially vulnerable. Pretty much every process is going to have some vulnerability. It's a matter of whether or not you have mitigating factors to decrease that vulnerability's risk of being exploited. But processes always have a vulnerability, and the adversary is looking to exploit those processes. And of course, we're all familiar with the technological side of the house. We rock CrowdStrike. That's one area, one avenue where technology took down, like, what, half the world, right? But think about Windows. Windows is everywhere. Windows is always being targeted. Office, always being targeted. Adobe, always being targeted, right? So the technology on the IT side, but also technology on the operational side. So if you work for an electric power company, or if you work in manufacturing, the manufacturing line is using a whole bunch of different technology that is quite possibly capable of being leveraged by adversaries for nefarious reasons, right? And so that comes back to, on the operational piece, what I was talking about at the strategic layer a little bit, touched on it, capability. So does the adversary have the capability, do they have the tools, do they have the know-how, so the expertise, capability and the expertise, do they have that in order to exploit the processes or the technology or the people at the intended victim that they're looking at, that target that they have within their sights? And then do they have the infrastructure to actually pull off an effective attack? And then lastly, at the tactical layer, as we move kind of down closer to the to the actual keyboard itself, kind of the proverbial keyboard. This is where you have like the actual digital assets, the actual physical assets, and the actual, when I say psychological assets, it's like the ability to potentially social engineer people to do things that they shouldn't do. So we always hear about, I think Scattered Spider is a good example. Who's heard of Scattered Spider? No one?
Really?
Really? Nope. I see somebody shaking their head in the back. You're kind of halfway raising your hand. So Scattered Spider is an e-crime adversary that's well known for deploying ransomware and also causing all kinds of havoc. I mean, they've done all kinds of things, but they're like very popular with, or very capable when it comes to attacking cloud-based environments. But they're really, really solid at social engineering. Like that is one of their big things, is being able to like call into a call center that's like operating on behalf of a company and then just worm their way into getting usernames, passwords, other goodies that allow them to conduct their attacks. Kevin Mitnick, everyone heard of Kevin Mitnick, right? He's like the OG social engineer, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about psychological. And then this is on the adversary side, the tools, the tactics, and everything that they have within their arsenal to actually effectively conduct the attack. All right, let me pause here for a second because this is quite a bit to take in on a single slide. Are there any questions?
Just to add on to what Scott has just basically mentioned, and to kind of address Shai, your point earlier about threat modeling. Actually, if you think about it, like a comprehensive threat model is actually made up of all these elements. Because a threat model generally has two parts. Right? There's a part where you focus on understanding yourself, and these are all the constituent parts that make up a threat model of your own organization. And then the adversary piece, this is the threat model that is basically, after identifying who your potential adversaries are, then you build your red threat model, right? And then that's where it applies to the red teaming side of house. So you think about, what goes into what is now known as adversary-led or intelligence-led penetration testing. Like it's derived right from this threat model. So actually, this not only represents what intelligence-led security looks like, this also actually forms the constituent parts of a threat model, right? Both your organization and also on the adversary. Of course, we will cover that actually in the last section of our presentation today. But since you asked the question earlier, I just thought to address this upfront.
Awesome. Any other questions? No? Alright, so let's,
Me, right?
yeah, this is you. Hoorah.
So yeah, this part is the before CTI 101, right? I'm going to do Intel 101, right? And I'm the Intel guy, so I'll talk about Intel 101. So this is the part where I'm hoping to start to get through some of the core topics of the intelligence discipline as a whole. So this applies not only to CTI, this also applies to signals intelligence, imagery intelligence, open source intelligence, and so on and so forth. And in order to do that, I think we have to begin with some definitions and some very, very basic concepts. Right? So really, I want to begin with the definition of intelligence. Right? I think if you know a thing or two, right, it's generally this is like CIA's definition of intelligence or intelligence, right? And I like this definition the best amongst all the ones that are publicly available today. Primarily for two reasons, right? The two reasons is because it does a great job with almost in the first line explain what are the core activities that make up intelligence. So it makes up collection, processing, which is some people also call it exploitation, and analysis. Right? So these are the three core activities of intelligence. And the second reason why I really like this definition is because it speaks to the nature or the spirit of intelligence, right? Because it's actually focused on a competitive entity, right? In other words, the adversary, right? Or in other words, depending on who your target is, right? The target is your competitive entity. So it speaks to the process and it speaks to the intent, right, of intelligence, right? So in order to basically deliver good intelligence, you have to do your due diligence, or you have to be competent, right, in the constituent parts of what makes up intelligence. So collection, exploitation or processing, analysis, right? And then it's adversary or threat centric, right? Then this gives you a kind of a good sense of what's important, what should be important, or what should be top of mind in an intelligence practitioner's mindset. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is what are the cardinal principles, right, of intelligence. So you may have heard of this being referred to as the acronym ART, like ART, right? Because it's, good intelligence has to be actionable in nature, it has to be relevant, and it has to be timely, right? So again, why this is important, and it's important to kind of get this off the cuff in the beginning of this conversation, is because again, right, when you put yourself in the shoes of being a CTI analyst or a CTI operator, right, you have to think about whether the intelligence you're collecting or the analysis that you're performing, it must achieve these cardinal principles, right? Actionable means that the intelligence must be useful, right? If the intelligence is just interesting, then it's not intelligence, it's just interesting, right? So this is the point about, doing kind of almost an abstraction of having the end in mind. So when you're collecting this information, you're analyzing this information, you have to do it with the end user in mind. So in the context of cybersecurity, like one of the reasons why IOCs, unfortunately, for better or for worse, is considered one of the more common forms of threat intelligence is, for better or for worse, because it's thought to be actionable, right? You can use the IOC to do something in the SOC. You can use the IOC to do something for threat hunting, right? But of course, there's a lot more to CTI than just IOCs, which we'll cover later. Then next, it has to be relevant, right? So for example, we talk about a healthcare entity, right? A healthcare entity in the Philippines being targeted, concerned with personal data or sensitive health information being stolen by, say, the Chinese, for example, or you're concerned with ransomware attack, right? They can basically take down the entire hospital or take down the entire healthcare institution, right? That is the context in which your organization operates in. So the CTI or the intelligence that you're going to be collecting, processing, and analyzing has to be in the relevant context. Like we talked about scattered spider, right? Scattered spider, if you are a healthcare institution in the Philippines, you've got to think about whether is there a history of scattered spider targeting entities in the Philippines? Is there a history of scattered spider going after healthcare entities, right, anywhere else in the globe? So you start to draw relevance of who are the relevant adversaries, what are the relevant threats, right, to your context, and then derive what is considered to be a relevant piece of intelligence to you. Because if you just, for example, if you're going to tell me, oh Aaron, I'm concerned about Cozy Bear or Fancy Bear, I'll tell you don't waste your time, because why would the Russians be concerned with what's happening in the Philippines? Not so much, right? But the Chinese, you're talking about aquatic panda, you're talking about Mustang panda, right? Those pandas that have a very strong history of operating in this region and in particularly targeting, right, entities in the Philippines. Then that is an example of a relevant adversary. That is an example of developing and arriving at relevant intelligence. And then the last cardinal principle is timeliness, right? In traditional intelligence, especially if you came from a very, very traditional, like I started my career as a reconnaissance trooper, so I used to carry like 30 kg on my back and go and hide somewhere in the jungle and spend God knows how much hours there, right? And there is this key matrix of intelligence is called the latest time intelligence of value, LTIOV, right? Because, and that speaks to like why intelligence is timely. Because if you are, for example, monitoring prolific development, say, I mean, a good example would be, say, the US presidential elections that's happening right now, right? The lead up to it. Any kind of disinformation, any kind of cyber attacks, any kind of DDoS attacks. Right now, of course, the US IC, the US intelligence community is very concerned with collecting any, precursors or indication of that kind of activity happening in the lead up to the elections, right? But what if, as an intelligence analyst, right, you are a CIA analyst or you are like an NSA analyst, and then you only get information like the day after the elections have happened, right? Then it's honestly pointless, right? So your intelligence also has to be collected like timeliness, especially if you are doing event-centric type collection, event-centric type awareness. So these are the 3 cardinal principles. Any questions? Quite straightforward, right? Okay. So now we talk about intelligence sources, and this is, in my opinion, important for 2 reasons, right? Because again, going back to my earlier point, there are many of us in the rooms today that's basically started have your interest around CTI picked because of your background in cybersecurity. So it's often very easy to kind of lose sight of actually what intelligence is actually like as a holistic discipline. But importantly, the second point is that actually, increasingly so as CTI matures as an industry, right? Practitioners on the ground are starting to also recognize the importance of what is known as intelligence fusion. So it's no longer just in order to achieve good intelligence for cybersecurity, it's no longer just enough to collect, quote unquote traditional CTI. It's also thinking about what other forms of intelligence that exist, and then you can basically arrive at maybe attribution, right? Or you can do campaign tracking a lot better. So these are the main disciplines of intelligence that exist today. And I don't know if you guys know this, but intelligence is considered the second oldest profession in the world. Right? I'm not going to say what the first one is because if you know, you know. so second oldest, right? And that's the reason why it's very comprehensive. And let me give you an example of why this matters. Because in intelligence, one of the operating principles that we like to talk about is the notion of all source collection. So for CTI, we talk about collecting across different forms of endpoint telemetry, network telemetry. You want to collect off sensors of the internet scanning type of activity and so on and so forth. Right? But now I'm of the view that we have to go even beyond that. We have to think about how we can get all this kind of technical data that is cyber in nature and also map it across some of the information here. So I'll give you an example. How CrowdStrike actually attributes pandas. Right? Like for example, how we attribute I think aquatic panda a couple of months ago. Right? It's actually I can't share the report because it's classified, but the methodology is actually a very good example of an all-source collection approach. Because first and foremost, of course, the base data sets are all the IOCs associated with the adversary, the TDPs, the C2 infrastructure of the TDP, of the adversary. But that actually only addresses one slice of attribution, right? Together with human intelligence, so we have a virtual operations team that engages on the criminal underground and also on the underground forums where nation-state actors are known to operate in. So there's an active conversation. So there's actually some kind of digital humane that's actually happening. And then on top of that, we also use imagery intelligence, right? You use satellite photos, to take photos of what is actually in there. Once you do some IP geolocation, you will take a satellite photo of what's actually on that location. Right? And that's how we arrive at, say for example, what's a good example? I think it was the best example, APT1, right? APT1 or Comment Panda, right? So that was how actually Mandian arrived at their attribution, and they could actually say that it is actually MSS Shanghai, and they actually have a known nexus with Jiao Tong Daxue, which is the university of the Jiao Tong University in Shanghai. And if you look at the report, they have everything from satellite photos or ground photos of the garrison, and then they even were able to basically draw the wire diagram, the organizational structure of the APT of that unit, right? 61398, right? 61398. And the reason why they can derive the organizational structure is because of human intelligence, right? So it's also, as you think about CTI, you also got to think about, if you want to achieve higher order workflows like attribution, right? If anybody here from the public sector, that's something that you want to do, you need to think about beyond CTI and think about how you can involve some of these other disciplines, right, to get you to the answers that you're after. And something to think about actually is that we like to say CTI as cyber threat intelligence, right? But actually the CTI, the nature of the work that we do is actually more counterintelligence than intelligence, right? Because you think about it, right, the vast majority of CTI workflows is focused on countering an adversary. And in traditional intelligence, in the traditional intelligence world, that's actually in the counterintelligence world, right? Because in the actual intelligence world, I don't know whether I'm making any sense here, but like the intelligence that we typically collect is actually focused on a specific target for offensive outcome. So actually, CTI is actually a misnomer because CTI is actually more counterintelligence than intelligence, right? And these are the key, kind of think about this as like the key activities of counterintelligence, right? That you should be familiar with and also be aware of. I will not talk about all of them, right? But I will talk about maybe 3 and 4, just to give you some flavor, right? So the third thing that we have here is called intel gain loss, right? So this is something that is basically the opportunity cost of making an intelligence assessment. So a lot of, as a practitioner, sometimes I get questions like, oh, Aaron, why are you not, there's this activity cluster that so and so is some vendor or some security researcher is like, they discovered and they are doing some reporting about it. Like, why is CrowdStrike not saying anything about it? Does it mean that CrowdStrike doesn't know that this is happening or that's happening? The answer is sometimes, or most of the times, we actually are aware of malicious activity happening. But there is actually a cost to attribution, right? Because when you attribute an adversary, right, it'll be all over the news, right? Then they will know that, oh shit, you caught them with their pants down, right? And then now, with their pants down, they got to find new pairs of pants, right? And you got to find new, basically they need to derive new TTPs, right? So the idea of intel gain loss is that sometimes intelligence is not as straightforward as it seems, right? It might sound very easy or straightforward to find information, aggregate the information, and then perform attribution. But sometimes you also have to think about what's the opportunity cost of doing that, right? By doing that, we will tip, right? We will tip, our awareness or our knowledge to the adversary, and then the adversary will typically use that as an opportunity to refine their TPs, and then you will have trouble to find them again, right? So it's going through that thought process of, kind of understanding that there is a tension, right, to intelligence, and of course.
So when the FBI closed down raid forums, and then everyone had to scramble to find out where all those people went because they didn't just go away.
Exactly. And like if you were in my presentation yesterday, like what happened over the time frame from Carbon to Cabernet to Carbon Spider or Fin7, that's basically what happened, right? And then you just expose them, you take them down, and then guess what, they are back, right? Or Emotet is a great example, right? I don't know how many takedowns they have basically endured, right? But they are back, right? For the 10th time or 12th time. And that's something to think about. There's something that also points to kind of how there's a lot of nuances or complexity to intelligence. Is also the fourth point, right, about deception. Anybody remembers, was it Olympic Destroyer? Olympic Destroyer, right? Yeah. You remember Olympic Destroyer, which was the attack on the Winter Olympics in Pyongyang, right? Yeah. So it was the Winter, I don't know how many Winter Olympics ago, right? But that was the classic case of deception because 2018 or 2016. Yeah. But you can just read up on it. But that's a classic case of deception because there was a source code that they were basically reversing, and then in that source code there were some very clear or obvious classifiers that pointed to a particular nation state, but actually, it turned out to be a completely different nation state. And that's I don't want to tell it because it's going to take a very long time to tell the entire story. But if you're curious about deception and what nation states would do from a deceptive perspective, right, go check out what happened at Olympic Destroyer. So that was a few Winter Olympics ago. Okay. So what's this? Okay, this is a very interesting topic. Something that is very close to my heart, and it also probably because I get into many difficult conversations with my customers and people that talk to me about. So something that you want to be cognizant about when you are involved in the tradecraft of intelligence is the notion of the field of view, right? And this speaks to many conversations that I've had over the course of time, right? Like, so the most common question would be like, oh, Aaron, there's a ransomware attack that happened let's say in the Philippines, right? And then they will, and one of my friends maybe Raymond would call me up and say, hey dude, why does CrowdStrike have anything on this particular ransomware attack that happened on this, say again, telco sector in the Philippines? And then unfortunately 70% of the time my answer will be like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have anything, right? And for the folks amongst, for the folks that have been doing CTI for a while, right, generally they understand why that's the case, but that's unfortunately not true for the vast majority of the people I speak to, right? And the fundamental reason is because the key point to take away from this particular slide is to recognize that every intelligence provider, right, whether they are a nation state that's collecting information, say maybe from the national cert, or if you are like a CrowdStrike or like a Mandiant, or you're like a Prerix, right, a private sector intelligence provider, right, or even if you are like or even you are doing your own collection, right, using like a NIST deployment to collect your own information. Every source of intelligence inherently is limited by its coverage, right? So I'm gonna address the elephant in the room, because one common question is at CrowdStrike everybody talks about the bears, the pandas, right? The cholimas, the kittens, right? The common question I get, maybe not so much in this part of the world, but I get it a lot in the world I live in the Arab world. They'll be like, so where are the eagles, the kangaroos, the lions, the I don't know what's the national animal of Israel, but whatever. But basically, like those, like where are those? Like you can't tell me that equation group doesn't exist, right? Because Kaspersky says so, and so like is CrowdStrike not tracking this? So that basically points to collection coverage, right? Because the reason why CrowdStrike doesn't collect from, why we don't attribute like eagles, kangaroos, lions, and the Western world basically, is because think about where those actors would typically show up in, right? They show up in countries that are adversarial to them, right? And guess what? CrowdStrike doesn't do business in those countries, right? And for that reason, right, there's an inherent field of vision. So one of a good example that I like to give is actually grounded in my own personal experience, because when I was actually building the CTI Fusion Center for the Ministry of Defense in Singapore as part of the Cyber Command, I was given budget, right, to basically buy, I think, 4 external feeds, right, to achieve as holistic or comprehensive situational awareness of the threat landscape that's relevant to Singapore, right? And Singapore is a non-aligned nation, so we are also equally concerned with what the Western world is up to, right? Or whoever that's out there. So the conventional wisdom when you talk to anybody is like they will buy the Mandiants, the CrowdStrike, the Call of Futures, the Intel 471 of the world. But eventually I actually made a justification to first and foremost extend the 4 feeds that I was given like budget for to 6 feeds. And I actually eventually only went with 2 Western feeds. The 4 other feeds were actually interesting feeds from other countries, because I wanted like that aperture. So if you're curious, I actually landed with Mandiant, which is now Google, CrowdStrike, right? So I had the 2 best Western feeds, and then I actually got a Chinese feed, right? Because I wanted to know what the Chinese knew about the kangaroos, the eagles, the lions, right? And I also had a Korean feed, right? And then I had a Russian feed, and I think the last feed was like I can't remember where it was. Some random, I think it was, maybe it's an Israeli feed. Yeah, it's an Israeli feed. So and as you can see, the reason why that is important is it goes back to the all source collection principle. It goes back to what's the intent of intelligence, right? So for me, as a non-aligned nation operating at a national level, I wanted to ensure that I have all my bases covered. And I know that if I were to depend on only a select set of feeds, right, they inherently have a field of vision that is biased, right? So think about this as you think about, if you are involved in building your team, right, or you're thinking about what vendors to engage, right, to give you that situational awareness. Think about this. Like the vendor's not going to tell you that they have a limitation. They're going to tell you they're the best shit on earth, right? Every vendor will tell you that, but you got to squeeze them hard on what to uncover what their field of vision, what their limitations are. So I'll give you an example. Record Future, right? I can say shit about them because I came from there and they are acquired already. So but the likes of Record Future is a classic example of what is known as a digital risk monitoring vendor that passes off basically as a CTI vendor. And the reason why I say that is because their collection is very focused on the open and the deep and the dark web. So you get, like, Record Future is a great place if you want to have like basically a really, really solid like OSINT tool that is purpose built for that purpose. But what Record Future and many others like your Zero Fox, your Group IBs, Intel 471 and Digital Shadows out there is that they do not actually have access to telemetry that is organic to their sensors, which is why CrowdStrike, right, does well with what we do in threat intelligence. That's the reason why Mandiant used to do really well, because they have their sensors, they go do IR engagements, they get direct observation of the adversary. So you want to think about the entire spectrum, right, and then think about mapping it back to what are your collection requirements, what's your context, what you're concerned with, and then build that holistic collection breadth, right, to achieve those requirements.
Let me jump in. Just because you guys are, budding potential CTI analysts and maybe in the future considering sources to purchase. So kind of to Aaron's point, and to just drive this home a little bit more, is when you're approaching and talking to vendors and some vendor tells you that they collect and can see everything, you gotta raise the bullshit flag.
Yeah.
There is no vendor on the planet that sees everything, which is exactly why, like to Aaron's point, at the national level, they invest in multiple feeds. You will never get the entire picture from a single vendor. CrowdStrike is very good in one area, Mandiant is very good in one area, Recorded Future is good in another area, SOC Radar in another area. So you have to, kind of think about what you're trying to achieve with the program that you're trying to build in your organization, and use that as the basis for, what potential feeds that you end up investing in. But the bottom line here is, don't ever let any vendor, no matter who they are, tell you that they can give you all of the intel, because that is it's like bullshit. Like, even in the U.S. government, as an example, there are multiple intelligence agencies that are collecting different types of intelligence that gets fused together and then shared across the U.S. government. So even in the government, they recognize that having just one agency try to do everything is not going to work. So just be aware of that and kind of use that for, food for thought in the event that you end up going down the CTI analyst path later on in your careers.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I mean, if you're curious in the Philippines, if you are an entity based in the Philippines, I'm not going to go to the industry level like nuances, but just as a geography, as a geopolitical kind of thing, you obviously want to be concerned with like the Chinese, right? Because I've seen them like up, like a Christmas tree across the entire country. So just an example. So just one very minute example is, if you are thinking about building a CTI program and you're thinking about purchasing a CTI feed or a few CTI feeds, right? One of the core requirements in your specs should be good coverage on the Chinese track actors, because they are the #1 nation state track here, right? Then depending on who you consider to be your e-crime track, you want to frame it accordingly. So even when you frame your requirements, it has to be adversary centric, right? It has to be based on an accurate understanding, a realistic understanding of the threat landscape that's relevant to the context. So back to the boring stuff. I think this is quite boring, right? So, but this goes back to my point earlier about the actionable, the relevant, and timely thing, right? This speaks to the point of intelligence should operate in this part of the funnel, right? If it's only, typically you will grab a lot of information from the operational environment. This could be the internet, this could be endpoint telemetry, this could be network telemetry, and then after you collect it, it's aggregated as data, and then after some processing and exploitation, right, it becomes information, and then only after analysis and production, right, it truly becomes intelligence. So again, right, many organizations unfortunately stop, shy of this. Right, they collect a lot of information, or they just have a lot of vendor fees. I come from the world where oil is cheaper than water, right? So I have customers that have Aaron, I have 10 intelligence feeds. I'm so kick ass. I'm okay, so tell me who's your #1 adversary. Then, So they stop here, right? Because they didn't do this, right? So when you think about not only in terms of capability, right? So in terms of what sources you collect, what sources you process, you also have to think about capacity. So as you're thinking about building your CTI team, you also have to think about, you have to stage your team for success, right? There's the people, the process, the technology, right? There's also this over-emphasis on technology today in CTI. You also want to think about your people, your processes, right? Is your CTI team sized sufficiently to do this, right? Because if you don't do this, it's going to be not very useful, right? So, I guess I managed to make a boring slide, not so boring. So, another boring slide, and this time I'm at loss at how to make this interesting. But basically, these are the core activities of threat intelligence, right? So I'm not going to belabor the point and go into the definitions of each one, right? But generally speaking, the reason why the fact that the intelligence cycle is framed this way, not only does it represent the key activities that happens in intelligence, this is first and foremost universal to all intelligence disciplines, so it's relevant to CTI, but it's also important to go back to that point I just made a couple of moments ago about capacity. Because when you think about building a CTI team, whether is it as part of the SOC or as an independent team, you want to have individuals that are at least partially or ideally fully responsible, right, for each of these core activities, right? And ideally they should talk to each other, but they shouldn't overlap, right? You don't want your connector to do analysis, right? Then you will get confirmation bias. You can read out what confirmation bias. I'm not going to give you a psychology lecture, right? Ideally, you also don't want your planning and directing folks, right, to be involved in any of this, because the planning and direction is basically the folks that impose the demand, right? And then the collection, the processing, and the analysis is to fulfill the demand. So you don't want to also have that conflict of interest, right? And of course, as we go along, we will talk about what these different core activities actually mean, right? What are the activities associated with them. Okay, and then we are ideally going to come back maybe 2 years from now to talk about intelligence analysis, because I think next year you might want to do something on collection, and collection is exciting. So come back 2 years later if you want to hear from us about analysis.
I mean, this is not going to come back in 2 years. It's RC20.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
You got to be here for the 20th anniversary, right?
Yeah, so at RootCon 20, we will do a full-fledged workshop on analysis. Next year, I think we're going to do something exciting on collection, maybe sock puppet or something. So if you want to do, if you're interested in collection, how to drive your own deep and dark collection, we'll probably do that next year. Because I'm actually building the content right now. But this is just like a 101 on analysis, right? And I'm not going to tell you who this old white guy is, and it's not even the right white guy, it's a different white guy.
It's not the white guy.
Yeah, like Sherman Ken doesn't look like this, I wish. This looks like, I don't know who this is. But anyway, the reason why I just wanted to be able to share this is because the Sherman Kent and the next guy we're going to talk about are kind of like the two recognized godfathers of intelligence analysis. And we're just sharing this so you can Google, right? Because when you Google them, you will find all the great stuff that they have written over the course of time. And until today, all the intelligence organizations in the US and of course very much of the Western aligned world uses a lot of the doctrine, right, that they have basically invented or innovated on when it comes to intelligence analysis. So Sherman Kent was, if you think about, anybody knows what ACH is, like analysis of competing hypotheses. If you don't know, it's fine, right? But ACH is one of the core frameworks of intelligence analysis, and he's the guy that basically came up with it. Right? And yeah, and this is his doctrine. We're not going to belabor the point here, but these are basically his recommendations. This was actually written in a memo. So this was his kind of almost, I think this came out in a parting gift when he was about to retire. And he wanted to kind of, lessons learned, right, over the course of performing intelligence analysis over the entire duration of Cold War. Right? What are the core operating principles, right, that makes for good intelligence analysis? Right? It's just basically this, right? So it's about human psychology, right? It's how do you actively identify and avoid biases? How do you take into consideration multiple diverse perspectives, diverse views, and then kind of arrive at a well-rounded holistic assessment? How do you communicate, right, to people? Because intelligence is not just like cybersecurity, right? Many of us are good at hands-on keyboard stuff, right? But how many of us are actually good at that and also good at communicating, right, what's important to our stakeholders, right? Which may not be as technical in nature or may not understand the subject matter as well, right? But this is what makes up, basically good behavior. If you want to be a CTI analyst, you should write this on the paper, burn it and drink it and something like that. Okay, and then the other guy, and again, this looks like Jeremy Iron, doesn't look like Richard Hoyer, but this guy is the other guy, right? And he was he's the one that until today there is, he wrote this, I want to say a 15 page document that is now available to download for free. So he's, and read that, right? Because it's good. He also touches on, basically that document is called The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. So he took a deep dive into what are some of the cognitive biases that prevents good intelligence analysis. And why I really like about Richard Hoyer's work is because he touches on actual use cases that happened in the Cold War to explain why you should avoid those biases, because it actually led to, I think he did something on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So yeah, these two guys, they basically earned their stripes during the Cold War, right? So they did intelligence for 30 years, their full career. And so analysis, right? We can't, in the context of this 101 conversation, there isn't much that we want to talk about in terms of analysis, but really the goal of analysis is to really grab all the data that's relevant and then internalize it, right, and then use it in a meaningful way. And what we have just basically listed here are some of the ways, right, analysis is supposed to translate into an actionable outcome. So you can see there is the attack surface piece, right, which is what we talked about earlier, right, using things like your Shodan, your sensors, or your own proprietary external attack surface tool to collect information about your internet exposed infrastructure, identifying misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, right, and then action upon it, right, to harden your environment, right. Or it's about developing understanding, right, of the adversary. So after you've gathered all the information, all the TDPs about your adversary, how do you build, right, for example, the MITRE attack heat map of an adversary that's relevant to your context, and then how do you use that information to do detection engineering, how do you use that to do penetration testing, right, and so on and so forth. So these are, think of this as like the use cases of intelligence analysis. Yeah, okay, this is why this. I think why I left this quote here is because one of the behaviors of one of the attributes that makes a good intelligence practitioner, right, is the ability to navigate ambiguity. Right. Oftentimes in security, we are trained as very logical people, right? Everybody knows booleans, either or as a binary, it's a 1 or 0 kind of situation. But in intelligence, right, it's actually 70% of it is grey, right? It's like when you see like an intelligence report, you see I'll be assessed with moderate confidence or with strong confidence or with low confidence that this is happening. And then for like I've spoken to so many CISOs, they're like, Aaron, what the hell does low confidence mean? Like, does it mean I'm gonna like and low confidence I'm gonna need to go to the toilet now? Does it mean I need to go to the toilet now? Like what's the probability, right? So we have to like being a good intelligence analyst is also about understanding like ambiguity and being able to communicate the ambiguity, right? Understanding why is there ambiguity in the first place? It could be collection, it could be the field of view, right? It could be related to the field of view, or it could be related to the fact that there just isn't enough information, right, to make a definitive assessment. So it's about doing that, right, and communicating, right, that ambiguity. And there's also something, a related point on this, which is basically the value of silence. That's something that also like something that if you are not from the intelligence like background or intelligence experience, you may struggle with it, because in signals intelligence, right? If you don't know what signals intelligence is basically listening in on people's chatter, right? Like today I'm going to go to the market, I'm going to go buy some fish, and then like then I'm going to go back home, go to my office, right? And then you basically listen to the entire conversation. And if that's a target, you want to do something to the target, you know exactly when to hit the target, right? I mean, that's a very isolated example of signals intelligence. But one of the key values of, one of the key things that we can derive in signals intelligence is silence. So sometimes when nothing is said, it also means something, right? So that's something that is counterintuitive, and think about what that means, right, in the context of threat intelligence, right? Does it mean when an actor's C2 infrastructure is dormant? Does it mean that they are completely inactive? What does it mean, right? Are they refreshing their tooling? Are they doing something else, right? So that's something that, as an intelligence practitioner, you get used to thinking about, looking beyond the surface level and thinking about what more could there be. This one, boring slide. Yeah, boring slide.
Built the slide.
Yeah, I built the slide. So you blame me. Boring slide. Next. Okay, so this one is I think it's also another boring slide. I'm sorry for the boring slides, but basically the point is that there are generally two forms of analysis that you will perform as an intel analyst, right? You either just with how any form of analysis that you do, right? If you have written a college level thesis before, you will know that you need to do qualitative analysis and you do quantitative analysis. So the same rigor, right, should be applied to intelligence, right? So the data-driven piece is the quantitative piece, right? And as most of us are cybersecurity practitioners, this is the part that we are very comfortable with, right? Aggregating tactical indicators, modeling the information, and then having a very clear output, right? How does it impact, like for example, your detections, right? Does it translate to a signature? Does it translate to a Yara, to a snort rule? Does it translate to a suricata rule? Does it translate to some kind of hunting that you do in your SIEM? That part is clear. The part that we are generally more uncomfortable with is the qualitative analysis dimension of things, right? So I guess this part would be, if you are interested to find out how we do this as intelligence analysts in a lot greater detail, show up at the 20th iteration of Recon. Okay, and if you're gonna faint from looking at this, you can like close your eyes and look at the ground, because this is supposed to like screw with your eyes. Right? Go ahead.
Can generative AI help with analysis?
100%. 100%. So to your question, generative AI is already being actively applied in many intelligence like providers, right? Like every vendor out there today that does threat intelligence is already actively applying or basically innovating and applying a layer of Gen AI on top of analysis. And what Gen AI is demonstrated to be good at doing today is at doing some of the more menial tasks that an intelligence analyst would do, right? So as an intelligence analyst, you usually, if you have an established organization, you generally would have your short cycle intelligence, which is your current intelligence, and then you have your medium to longer term kind of intelligence. So for example, if you have a team that focuses on the Chinese threat, right, you have a team that focuses on what the is there, like in the last 24 hours, is there any announcements that the Chinese government made that could have an impact on cybersecurity? Then you also have teams that do, in the medium term, right, these are the current active adversaries, 10 active Chinese adversaries. What are their TTPs? How are they evolving, right, in the medium term? And then you have the longer term type of analyst that focuses on reading, like for example, Made in China 2025, or reading their 5-year plans to understand how their collection requirements will change and how their targets might change. So the Gen AI piece is very good for that first piece. Right? The Gen AI piece is very good for creating like daily summaries, right? Intel summaries based on open source information, based on the information that the vendor is able to collect, and then generating at a click of a button, right? Like ask Dave, like what happened in the last 24 hours. Yeah. Gen AI is great for doing that, and we are already seeing that happening right, with many of the vendors today. Please.
How do you prevent an analyst from believing an information is true? Like, how do you counter or disinformation?
Is this more like a question around the bias that an analyst may have?
Yes.
Or?
Okay. The short answer is come back for Rubicon 20, but the not so short answer is there is this thing called the analysis of competing hypotheses. So look it up. It's a framework that analyst uses to come up to arrive at, because usually when you have when you're about to make an assessment, before you make an assessment about a particular activity or particular adversary, you typically will generate about 2 or 3 hypotheses, right? And then you will use the framework called an analysis of competing hypotheses, ACH for short, to basically score, right, the hypothesis, right? And that process is supposed to help you distill, right, the considerations, distill the evidence, right, and help you either prove or disprove a hypothesis. So there's a structured method to try to avoid confirmation bias or anchoring bias, right, as using a method, right, to kind of prevent that. So if you're interested in that, go read the psychology of intelligence analysis.
Is there something like in particular that like led you to ask this question, like in terms of like maybe a colleague of yours that's consuming intel is like biased against a particular source or read something and only believes that this is true and is ignoring other reports? Like, is there something that is a little more to the story?
Go away.
Just checking in. Thank you for checking in.
We're good.
We're good.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, one of the sources will be social media.
Yeah.
And disinformation is one type of
100%.
right? So how do you prevent analysts from believing something they see or use to social media, or even news sources? So what is there a way for them to stop the think, oh, this is a disinformation campaign, and this is something that's
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that probably goes back to more or less what Eric was.
Can you restate, sorry, summarize that thing?
Just like, so yeah, for those of you that didn't hear the question, or the subsequent, amplifying components of the question, it's really down to, if you have an analyst that's, say, looking at a bunch of data that's on Twitter or, other social media, and or there's, news reports on something, and everyone's saying that, this particular thing is happening, how do you, as an analyst, recognize that that is either true or potentially disinformation? And I think it just comes back to, like, you have to just look at the broader picture. It comes down to collection, comes down to the analysis, comes down to also, sometimes at the end of the day, I hate to say it, sometimes there's a gut feeling too. Like, and then you have to, like, start going down the rabbit hole of, doing more analysis, more collection, before you can kind of get to the heart of it.
So to Scott's question and to your question, right, like it goes back to like one of the key ways to overcome that beyond using like analysis frameworks is to think about how you're doing a collection, right? So when you're, for example, collecting off social media, you're actually trying to answer a question, right? So what's the question, right? And then if you want to answer this question, is social media the best way to answer this question? Right? It could be one of the ways to answer this question. And then that basically lends to this notion of what is called a collection management framework. So you have your intelligence requirements, you have all your sources. You have to score how your sources will answer your questions, right? And then social media should just be one of the sources that answers that question. So in doing so, you actually think about maybe 2 or 3 other sources that would also help you prove or disprove the question that you're trying to answer, right? And then that's how you avoid bias, right, from a collection perspective. And then if you layer the analytical framework that comes after that, if you do ACH after that, I can assure you that the biases will be avoided. So it's just how rigorous you want to go through the entire process. But I would definitely encourage rigor if you are thinking about social media, because social media is designed to be echo chamber. Yeah,
that's all it is noise.
Yeah.
Right?
A good question.
So then, if you're a small team or one or two
You're
people,
fucked.
CPI, I guess
Yeah.
the idea is to try and get as much of a broad source.
Yes, exactly. If you are a small team thinking of starting out, I generally recommend you start with like open source labs. You create, go and read Michael Bazel's like 8th or 9th edition. Go grab like half the tools that are being talked about in the book, start a lab, grab all your information in, then you start with like a mini collection management framework. You start to do some scoring of your sources. That will be like a very, very good, that will be like 20%, that will be like a good start. Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna go through all the
Social media.
boring slides.
Just ignore it.
So, boring slide.
I think that the
Boring
answer
slide.
to the question is ignore social media.
Okay, this basically is a summary of the paper that I talked about earlier. So read the paper, don't be lazy. Then read this book, don't be lazy. Great book. If you haven't read this book, please go read it, but you will need like 10 cups of coffee or not 20 cups of coffee to get through it. I use 30 cups of coffee to get through it. Twice, but one of the best books I've written in my life, because this talks about thinking. Like how you think about things, and it's basically the premise is there's a fast brain and there's a slow brain, and then when does your fast brain kick in? When does your slow brain kick in? So, and both system 1 and system 2, which is your fast and your slow brain, has direct implications on how you think about intelligence analysis. So read this book, don't be lazy. And that book covers this, so don't be lazy, read that book. Okay, this is the one that come back for Rukon 20. But basically, this is a quick summary of some of the models that are typically used in CTI. I think Scott will cover this in greater detail, but generally speaking, when you think about analysis, right, the common models that come to mind, depending on the intended purpose, right, will be your Lockheed Martin Q chain, your MITRE attack, your diamond model. So these three are the most common models. From a 101 perspective, if this is the very first time you're hearing about it, don't be lazy, go and read the paper, go read the book. If you want the links to the paper, to the book, come find me, because I know where all of them are. And yeah, this one definitely Rukon 20, right? Because this is what we are going to basically, these are the key concepts in what is known as a bucket of analytical methods, known as structured analytical techniques. There are at least 3,000 pages like books written on this. You need a lot of coffee to get through them, and a lot of practice, right? Because it's not only about knowing the models, it's about using and applying the model, and then internalizing what those models mean, right, for your own workflows, for your own context. And finally, I can pass it off to Scott. I'm gonna get some water when I'm done.
All right, before we jump into the next chapter, are there any questions on anything that we've covered? Like, and just any questions in general? We've had some good questions so far. Shy side of the room, don't be shy. By all means,
Encourage them.
please ask questions.
Great. Try harder.
What question should I ask?
That's a great question. That's a great question. What question should I ask? Okay, so there's no questions. Oh, we have a question?
How do you monitor the Chinese media and the events happening within Chinese language and their political boundaries?
So I think that goes back to what Aaron mentioned, right, when he was talking about the different feeds that he invested in when he was, at his previous role. So it just comes down to the sources, right? So if you're wanting to purchase sources, then you just need to find a intelligence provider that's going to be able to match your requirements. If you're going to try and roll your own collection, then you need to determine where are the sources that are going to get you the information that you're trying to collect.
Especially for deep and dark web.
Deep and dark web is all going to be more or less the same. It's just understanding on the dark web, for example, what are the forums and what are the chat channels, say for example, on the different, on like QQ for example, or whatever, where do the Chinese actually have those conversations? Where do they collaborate? Right? And then Yeah, that's all, only if you're gonna roll your own collection apparatus.
And it's a highly iterative process because
Yeah.
as you get familiar with the terrain, you will know what kind of information or how activity transpires on specific sources. Then you will basically, it's like the idea of a general sensor and a focal sensor, right? You have a general sensor that goes in first, collects basically a wide swath of terrain, and then when you find a target, then you have a focal sensor that flies in, and do that. So usually you will start with like a general like personas to infiltrate. Right? After you infiltrate, the next thing you want to do is you want to identify key personas that have information that you are curious about. So for example, if you talk about access brokers, right? They red light your providers, they're basically using information, they're stealing credentials, and then they're selling them to the underground. But what's unfortunately happening is that there are also a lot of criminals that are buying this information and reselling the information. Right? So what you want to do is actually you have to slowly infiltrate, you have to get in, know the lay of the land, know who's selling stuff, and then you have to work your way upstream. Because you have to collect information, you have to buy information, you have to do deduplication, and realize, oh my god, this is a fucker, and that fucker is the same information. So they are not the primary source, you have to go up one layer. So you have to keep doing that, right? And the Chinese is the same. For example, if you want to just know where the Chinese are operating, it's not difficult to find where they are lurking. But if you want to know what kind of e-crime tooling that they are using to target their own, like how, for example, APT41 is using, they are moonlighters, right? By night they target gaming companies within China. If you want to find like their tooling and you want to tie it to like Plugx or Shadowpad, then it's a very different conversation altogether. You need somebody that can speak Mandarin really well, understands all the underground slang that the Chinese uses, and then you have conversations with specific personas. So it speaks to it's a complex operation, and it depends on, again, what are the questions you're trying to answer.
I'd say the easiest answer to the question is make sure you invest in a
higher score.
provider. Higher score. Invest in a provider that's going to be able to, to provide you the intel that's going to answer the questions that you're trying to get answers to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm particularly coming from the consumer side. So I really like what David mentioned about having feeds and also having like the particular things that they can look for.
Yeah.
So we are thinking of getting 2 feeds. So can you tell me if it's a good thing to have like say, for example, recorded future in a group ID? Because I think they are doing the same, right?
Yes.
So what's the best mix? We're gonna be doing more.
So we need to unpack a bit further. I mean, and we are giving free consultation.
We do like beer.
Yeah, we do beer.
We like beer.
Beer is fine. Yeah, but like okay. So let's use your example as to unpack, right? So what's your retail? Is it like what kind of organization?
Okay, so
I think I spoke to your guys before.
So your e-commerce, and I think there's, for us, like there's obvious answers that, or rather obvious questions that we know that you're trying to ask. But like, what is important to you to get out of an intel provider?
So we want to have larger coverage.
Larger coverage of what?
Yeah.
Of whatever. I mean,
No, it can't be whatever.
So
Right?
it can't be whatever.
It can't be whatever.
That's the thing with our organization have lots to cover.
Yeah, you can't have the answer to the question can never be whatever. The answer to the question needs to be, we're concerned about credentials being sold for
Yeah, that's
our
what I'm saying.
customers, or we're concerned about fraud
Yeah.
related to
That's another thing.
so like that's what you got to outline. It's like what are the questions that you want to ask, and
Prioritize those questions.
Yeah.
And then map your collection to it.
exactly.
So basically, you have like 50 considerations, right? You have everything from financial, like fintech, right? You are concerned about your intellectual property. You are concerned about your transactions. You are concerned about like your PII, your personal data, right? And all these have actually different threat actors that are targeting these three buckets. And I'm sure that there's like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more, right?
And that's only at the big level. We're not even talking about like at the lower level criminal level right here in the Philippines, right?
I can tell you for a fact that if your concern is like Facebook scams, don't bother, build your own collection. Because nobody can do that. That's something we're thinking of doing. Nobody can do that. And we've been long enough in the field to know that. Like, no vendor can do that. Because Facebook's a very difficult collection target. But for you, I think you have to prioritize, right? Because if you consider your financial, if you are concerned with fraud, then you should generally be looking at the e-crime side of things. Then you want to look at the vendors that are good at e-crime. Like if you are concerned with like personal data, right? Because you guys are a payment house, you also have a lot of personal data. Then you might want to be more concerned with the Chinese, right? Because the Chinese will go after personal data. So it's a matter of priority. See, the fact that you give me that expression, it means that you actually have a priority, like you already have a priority in mind. So after you have prioritized what are the questions or the threats that you are most concerned with, then you want to look at the sources that best covers those.
It sounds like the priority is e-crime. I mean, if you're looking at recorded future and group by B, then obviously you're concerned with e-crime, right?
But if you're concerned e-crime, I suggest if you're looking at the two, you can drop one of them. You can consider like maybe Intel 471. Intel 471 is great for e-crime. Because there are a bunch of X-law enforcing. And then if you are more physical fraud, then if you are more like physical fraud, then you might even want to consider Flashpoint. Flashpoint is good for like physical stuff.
Because we're watching the cybersecurity space. We're also watching the fraud space. Like, these are criminals in the weapon.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a good mix. Because
I mean, there's always going to be a good mix.
Single feed will not be
Single feed, I mean, it depends on the provider, like, that can give you decent coverage, but yeah, no single vendor is going to give you everything, right? But I think that when we say no single vendor is going to give you the full picture, we're primarily talking about like the broader application of cyber threat intelligence. When you're talking about like the deep in the dark web, that question becomes a little bit, or that idea becomes a little bit more ambiguous, because like the deep in the dark web, most of the vendors are collecting the same data. The difference is how are they presenting it to the consumer. So like Recorded Future presents things much different than how SOC Radar presents things, which is different than Group IB, et cetera, et cetera. So the data may have, like maybe Recorded Future, like if you were to plot it all like on a Venn diagram, like there's probably very little gap between the vendors. There's going to be some gaps, but very little. It's just all about like, is SOC Radar easier to use than Group IB?
Basically, in a nutshell, is if you want pretty dashboards, you do Recorded Future, or you do SOC Radar. If you want really good, like if you want like all the metadata that all the commodity information stealers are stealing, go look at this small vendor called Security. They are good at it because they don't give a shit about like customer privacy. So you just grab all the data and just like spit out all the data on the platform. So you can see, for example, if you have an employee of Gcash uses their personal computer to serve porn, and then there is a commodity information stealer that grab it from their browser. You can see all the other credentials that they log in is stolen from the browser cache in clear. Yeah, so it depends on the use case, right?
So they logged into Gcash as well as porn sites.
Yeah, and then boom,
it's going to be right in there. So yeah, but I think like the one thing that I want to emphasize from your question is the whatever piece. When you're looking at cyber threat intelligence, like if you're looking to invest into a feed or two or three or four, the answer to what are your questions can never be whatever. It can never be.
We're gonna work on it.
Yeah, you need to outline the questions, because otherwise you're not going to know which vendor is worth like investing in.
And it's not a complicated exercise. Like, if you sit together with the core team, honestly, it takes like an hour to come up with the questions. Everybody writes their own questions, and then you put it together. The questions that overlap will be generally prioritized, and then you really have the answer. And then that will lead you to know what sources to consider. Sorry.
Great question.
Question? No, question?
Sorry, I had something to share.
Oh, please.
I used to be part of the CTI team there, and
Oh, oops.
And
yeah.
in addition to the dashboard, Recorded Future also publishes Finnish intelligence. So we also monitor dark webs, and there might be a case in which you would see that we're already reporting that Gcash has credentials over the dark web, or not necessarily like that. It's just take into consideration.
you guys need to talk, man. You guys need to talk. Shake hands, cry, that emotions, and then talk. Some beers, hug and kiss, and then have a good conversation.
You from Cyber?
Sorry?
Cyber?
My current company?
I mean before?
No, I was with Recorded Future.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, please do not buy cyber for God's sake.
Any other questions before we continue?
Yeah. Please.
All right, somebody from the shy side.
Yay.
Outstanding.
The shy represents.
Yeah, I just want to hear your based on what was
Yes, I
discussed
worked there for nearly 5 years. No, not then, right?
from the criminal standpoint.
do you think they're using the same framework, or let's say both state sponsored and just someone in the basement who has a lot of time to do these things, right, compared to us in the corporate side? Do they follow the same framework, or do they have a different approach in collecting and analyzing intelligence?
Oh, you're talking about like the collection side, or are you talking about the attacker side?
I don't want to say attackers, like, let's say they're planning to, but they're in the planning stage.
So they're like criminals or adversaries of some type that are planning an attack. So you're talking about them doing like the reconnaissance piece, like trying to figure out like what to exploit, what's available to attack.
Because on the corporate side, you're trying to block them, right? Going ahead of them if we can. But what on their side, what they do they follow the same framework? From your perspective, because your experience.
So I'm a Chinese researcher, so I can speak to the Chinese use case. So the Chinese use case is a bit, the Chinese, first and foremost, state, right? So the states operate very differently from the crime, like from the criminal groups. They're a lot more structured. They either the PLA or the MSS. Thanks.
You're doing a wonderful job.
So to answer the question, right, first you must recognize, in the context of China, you recognize that they are a state. Second, you recognize that as a state, it's the function of how an intelligence agency or military intelligence agency operates generally do not differ that much, right? Like a bureaucratic organization. Right? So to answer kind of give you a flavor of the question that you asked, right? As an organization, if you consider, for example, the Chinese-based threat to be a potential threat, what you can kind of unpack, right, the probability of the threat that it poses to your organization in many ways. Like you can take a long-term view of things. Like for example, if you are concerned right now that there is no Chinese activity in your network, but you're concerned maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, would there be, and you want to prepare for that? One thing you can do is that's where strategic intelligence comes into play, right? Because for example, the Chinese specifically, every 5 years, they release this thing called a 5-year plan. And in a 5-year plan, it addresses all the gaps that they are currently facing in their economy. And it's a well-known fact that those gaps that they identify becomes the intelligence requirements of the foreign intelligence agency, the military intelligence agency of the Chinese. So if the simple way to think about this is if your industry falls within the technology gaps, then you better go and look at what tools these organizations are, these adversary agencies. So that's what happens at the strategic level. Then at the operational level, if you are concerned with the Chinese as a current threat, right, then the next layer of collection that you want to do is you want to understand what are the most common tooling that the Chinese are known to use. And actually the Chinese is not as difficult a target as what many people seem to think, because they are very lazy, right? And because they are very lazy, like ShadowPad has been around for like what, since 2008, it's still there, right? A lot of the current, like your Institute X, your current tooling of what they use as a remote access tool, for initial access, is still as old as, it's a form of PlugX. So PlugX has been around since 2006. And PlugX is a form of Poison Ivy, which is around since 2003. So it's not difficult to follow the lineage, right, and keep tabs on the evolution of the tooling. And then basically have somebody, if for example, hypothetically, you recognize the Chinese as a threat in the organization, you at least want to have some kind of malware person, right, that focuses on keeping tabs on how the tooling is evolving, so that your detections, your architecture, right, your prevention policies, your prevention capabilities can basically either detect and block those like tooling. So that's the general way to think about it. He's considered the toilet. I guess I can. Okay, in the interest of time, I will just press on. Gosh. Okay, so forget this. We just go straight into. Okay, so this part we're going to talk about the CPI specific like concepts, right? And I think, in my opinion, what's the most important slide of this section is actually this particular slide. So the question of what makes an adversary or what makes a threat, right? So a threat, simply put, or adversary, simply put, is a combination of intent, capability, and opportunity. Right? And if you want to think about, if you want to go a step further to identify potential adversaries, if you want to go a step further to prioritize your adversaries, it is also a function of these three key factors, right? Because there are many, for example, Russians, highly capable, right? And they are known to go after a wide, they can target like multi-domain environments. So they can go after the cloud environment, they can go after your on-prem, off-prem, they can do like basically a great amount of magic, right? But they may not necessarily be relevant, like they may not necessarily possess the intent to target your context. So when you want to think about identifying your adversaries and identifying the relevant threats, right, it ideally should be the nexus of these three, right, key factors, right, and basically the smaller bubbles, right, speak to the, what we mean when we say intent. Right? Are they espionage driven? Are they financially motivated? Right? Opportunity, right? What are what aspects of your tech stack, what aspects of the cognitive side of things, or even your processes that they can target? So these are like vulnerabilities. Right, and then this is how capable the adversary is, right? Okay, now you're back, you can work. And then we go to memes.
Oh, nice. We go to memes now.
Yeah, we have memes now.
I don't even remember. Oh yeah, this meme. I mean, so yeah, the goal here really is just to recognize that you need to think about the different types of information that you're collecting. And it should be organized into relevant buckets.
Actually, the meme answers your question.
Yeah, this really does, right? Because that's really what it comes down to, right? You've got to have those intelligence requirements. I think Aaron talked about this, earlier, right? There's models. We didn't really go down the rabbit hole yet, but the diamond model, which I think is coming in a few slides. Everyone probably knows the cyber kill chain, right? Who's familiar with the cyber kill chain?
Lockheed.
Yeah, the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So a few of you, everyone knows MITRE ATT&CK?
Has to be.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a kind of structured way of kind of putting together a model on how adversaries conduct attacks. And I think we're going to probably have to speed up because how many slides do we have here? And we only have like 30 minutes.
Okay, do part 2 next year.
Well, yeah, we need to speed up a bit. So we're gonna speed up because we only have like 30 minutes.
Quick, really quick.
So, but we've had some really solid conversations so far. This is good. I just realized that there's like a gap in the on the wall there. So yeah, like analyzing like intrusions is, I think, at the end of the day, a core component of what everyone is interested in when it comes to cyber threat intel. Your interest, probably as a budding cyber threat intel analyst, is in understanding exactly how an intrusion occurred, right? Like, what was the tools that were used? What was the attack vector that was leveraged for the adversary to gain access into the network? Did they pop like a public-facing web server? Did they purchase credentials on the criminal underground? Once they did that, that's initial access. From initial access, what did they do to escalate privileges? How did they move laterally? So conducting the full scope of analysis is probably the most, doing the actual analysis is not really interesting, but understanding how an attack occurred is probably the sexiest part of CTI, right? Is understanding from start to finish, from A to Z, how did that attack occur, right? How did that ransomware actually get deployed in that manufacturing organization's estate? What led to the initial access to the actual deployment of ransomware? And that's when I think you said next year is the analytical piece, 20 is the collection piece?
No.
Oh, okay.
Next year
is collection.
Yeah.
So the analytical piece, understanding and how to do analysis on intrusions, RuCon 20.
I personally teach intrusion analysis over the course of an entire day. So, yeah.
Okay, so here's one example on the left-hand side of using the diamond model to kind of plot out, how an attack occurred. You can see the 4 axes, I guess, if you will, of the diamond, right? You have the adversary, you have the infrastructure, you have your organization potentially as the victim, and then you have the capabilities of the adversary, right? So I think this is, just a joke, diamond model leveraging Star Wars as as an example. But think about plotting, Aquatic Panda as the adversary. What's the infrastructure that Aquatic Panda is using to target, say, a telco here in the Philippines? What are the capabilities that Aquatic Panda uses when they're conducting their attacks? and then the victim being a particular telco, for example, here in the Philippines, like, what is it that they're after? What is it that was the low-hanging fruit, potentially, or maybe part of a longer campaign that allowed Aquatic Panda to actually get in? And then what is it that Aquatic Panda was after? Were they after call data records? Were they after, more, further access to the telco network? So thinking about all of that, you just plot it on using the diamond model on this chart, and you can have like a quick understanding, easy understanding of like what a particular attack or what a particular adversary is trying to accomplish or has accomplished. And it's really useful for, as it says, attribution and or understanding the TTPs of an adversary. So if you're a CTI shop, putting this together on like the different adversaries that you've modeled, the threats that you're modeling is going to be really helpful for your day-to-day job.
So would you include the, let's say, less relevant, I wouldn't say no, but like the blaster, right? When you use the blaster much, is that still relevant in the capabilities, even though it's not a used
It is because
weapon in this case?
It is because this is like think of this as like a profile. Yeah, think of this as like an adversary profile, right? And so you want to list all of it out because they may not have used it today, but they may use it 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now.
And I mean, if you're curious like how this is actually being used in practice, right? Generally speaking, you use this on like a campaign. Like you did some observations. There is maybe over the course of a couple of weeks or a month where something's happening, and you're mapping all your indicators, right? All the information that you have from intrusion or incident response to this. And how it eventually leads to attribution is imagine like multiple of this, right? And then once you start to see similarities, you start to say, oh, actually there's a key indicator, right? There's a common tool that they're using across multiple. There's a common C2 that they're calling out. That there is a common C2 infrastructure of the same adversary. Once you start to see multiple similarities, you have like maybe 5 or 6 of this then becomes an activity cluster. And then you have like 20 or 30 of this over a long period of time that becomes an adversary.
Pattern of behavior. Pattern of behavior is key. You're not going to do attribution like, just off 3 attacks. It's just not going to happen unless they, left their business card on the desk. And then even if they did, that kind of goes back to the Olympic destroyer conversation from earlier, right? It may just be one adversary that's trying to perpetrate as another adversary or, deceive people, all about, misdirection, right? So that's why you want to do this. I mean, yeah, this is, I don't know, I think the picture is cool, but yeah, I mean, threat actors, right? Like, this is ultimately like what we're talking about when we talk about attribution, right? Who's behind the attack? And that really goes back to what we just were talking about, plotting out all the attacks and kind of understanding what is that pattern of behavior, and then going back to what Aaron mentioned about like the geolocation piece, like, as you see their infrastructure and you see what tools they're using, where does that all go back to? Are you able to plot that back to, certain parts of China or Russia or North Korea, et cetera, right? I think there was a question over there.
Yeah, with regards to the diamond model, and if we subscribe to the CTI services, is it something that they should be providing us over the course of the period that we are subscribed to them?
I don't think you'll see like the diamond model specifically like in a web page, like in a web-based, like a SaaS-based service, but you will see like what ultimately amounts to a diamond model on like threat profile pages for adversaries. So like to use CrowdStrike as an example, all of this information that you'll see here will show up on like with the exception of the victim. The top 3 vertices, that'll show up on a profile page. Same thing with like SOC radar. So you'll get most of the information, but the key there though is that the intel provider is doing all of this work for you behind the scenes. So you don't necessarily need to do it with the intel they're providing. You need to do this with the intel that your own organization is collecting. So that's not, and I think that's an area that Aaron is passionate about, right? Is the collecting your own intelligence, right? So your organization is developing its own intelligence, right? You have your own telemetry data that's coming from your own workstations, from your own servers. There's a whole series of data that you're aggregating at your own SIM, right? That data, when you're analyzing it, you can plot that in a diamond level, right? And then you can kind of compare what you've put together versus maybe what the intel providers are showing you. And is there a gap? And if there's a gap, maybe it's a different adversary, or maybe you're seeing some new shit that like somebody else hasn't seen. But that's probably less likely. But it helps you understand what kind of like potentially in that case you're probably talking about more localized activity. So like maybe criminal activity that's local to the Philippines that doesn't necessarily get provided by a provider like Recorded Future, Sock Radar, etc., or CrowdStrike or Mandiant. Does that make sense? Sorry for moving around.
It's okay.
Okay. Why are we going backwards?
Because I went back to the diamond model.
Oh, sorry. Okay, good. So yeah, like the difference between a threat actor and a campaign. So a campaign is a series of attacks that have been conducted by a threat actor. So a threat actor is the bad guy, and the campaign, so one attack, I guess you could consider a campaign, but generally not. A series of a series of attacks by a threat actor is now considered a campaign. Particularly if it's like, confined to a specific industry or a specific geography with like a similar intent to like say drop ransomware or steal intellectual property. Like if the outcome, if the objectives are the same, now we're talking kind of like a more on the campaign side of the house. Who's familiar with TLP? Traffic Light Protocol. Okay, so a few people. So I mean, the bottom line is like Traffic Light Protocol is a way to basically classify documents. I mean, it's not too dissimilar from like confidential, secret, top secret, except it's not quite that severe. Where secret, top secret, confidential has like national security implications. This is just all about like, at the end of the day, potentially protecting personally identifiable information, people's names, organizations that shouldn't be necessarily named, and how you can distribute that information. So when you're writing like reports in your own organizations, you want to put classification markings on them, because if you're naming specific, say, data that was stolen or specific people's names in the organization, you may not want to share that outside the organization, or you may not want to share that outside a particular community. So you may want to use or think about, red or amber. So red being the most restrictive, white being the least restrictive. This means, there's basically no restriction on what you can share, whereas red is like the most restrictive and the most difficult to share. And you're not going to share it with a huge audience. So I don't want to spend too much time here because we're like running out of time, but this is just a solid classification system, and you can quite easily Google this. There's solid articles on the internet about TLP.
Maybe we should skip forward to the PNRs. We'll skip this.
Yeah, we can skip
We'll
this.
skip this. Probably can skip. I mean, this is the law. If you know minor attack, you know the previous slide.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's familiar with minor attack.
Let's talk about this.
So yeah, this I think goes back to the whatever comment. not to belabor that point, but I mean, this is the key to understanding, like, why are you doing intel, right? Like, what are you going to do with the intel? Why do you need intelligence? You need to ask yourself those questions, like, what is it that you want to know, right? Do you want to understand if you're the target of nation states because maybe your organization has very, very valuable intellectual property, or maybe because you're a healthcare organization and that personally identifiable healthcare data could be leveraged by like foreign intelligence for any number of reasons? Do you want to know if you're a target of e-crime adversaries. I mean, I guess the answer to that question is generally going to be yes, but then it's going to be a matter of like which e-crime adversaries may target you, because certain e-crime adversaries have a penchant for targeting finance versus other industries, etc. Right? So the key though is like being able to sit down with your organization, with all the stakeholders in the organization, and understand what will be important to them. Because intelligence shouldn't just be like, hey, what does the SOC need to know? It's like, what do the decision makers need to know? What do the other execs need to know? What do the business unit leaders need to know? What do the directors need to know? Like, it's a byproduct of, like, in your intelligence collection and what you're going to ultimately invest in is going to be a byproduct of the questions that the entire organization is trying to get answers to. So you have to sit down and take the time to do this. And it could take anywhere, like depending on the size of your organization, it could take an hour, or it could take a few days, it could take a week. I mean, it could take a couple weeks. I mean, it just depends on, obviously, the organization. But before you can ever consider what intelligence sources to invest in, or if you're going to roll your own collection apparatus, you need to do this. This is like the key component. This is the initial prerequisite for anything that you're going to do with intelligence.
So if you're curious, right, we spoke about intelligence life cycle, right? The first thing we talked about is planning and direction. This is the heart of planning and direction. So before you do anything, right, just to reiterate what Scott said, before you buy any collection feeds, before you start thinking whether you want to consume intelligence, you want to start generating your own intelligence, before you make any fundamental decisions about how you're going to drive your CTI program, do this first. Because when you do this, it'll be very clear like what are the constituent components that will make up your CTI program.
Yeah, so like, think about healthcare organizations. You have the PII data, but then healthcare also has kind of the, I don't know what we're calling it these days, it's like the medical IoT devices, right? So I think there's like some weird acronym for that. But, like, are there vulnerabilities to those medical IoT devices? So healthcare has different considerations than, say, finance or fintech, which is going to have like a fraud component, which isn't necessarily important to healthcare, which is going to be different if you're working in PubSec, right, at a government agency. So it's very, very important to do this. Without doing this, you may end up wasting money. Like if you only involve a couple stakeholders or a very limited number of stakeholders in developing your intel requirements, you may end up investing in, say, Record a Future or CrowdStrike or Mandiant or, whatever, and it may end up being a waste of money because it may not end up providing the organization with the intelligence that you need or they need in order to be effective, right? So this, I can't drive it home enough, is the most important component of whatever you're going to do with intelligence.
You just jump to the next
Yeah,
slide.
this is...
The next slide is the example.
Yeah, so here's some very simple examples of intelligence requirements. And I think you heard during the conversation earlier, like some of the questions that we were asking to get to the heart of like what's important to like a fintech company, right? But this is just like some general questions, right? So if you have an organization at that strategic layer, you can see just how some of this is. I mean, I think maybe it's because I've been doing this for a while, but to me it just seems just like common sense, right? It's at the end of the day, I think it really is just asking those common sense questions, but you have to document it, put it on paper, because then it will allow you to understand what's important. And you do this through like just interviews with the relevant stakeholders in the organization. Have those interviews and map the requirements to like strategic, operational, or tactical. You can see here at like the operational piece, we're talking about a very specific threat actor, right? So Wicked Panda, so a Chinese-based threat actor. So if they breach the organization, like what is Wicked Panda after? Or what is Aquatic Panda after? Or what is Fancy Bear after? Or what is Labyrinth Shalima after, right? Or what is Scattered Spider after? Scattered Spider is always going to be after money, but maybe they just want to create havoc too, because that's kind of what they do, right? So that, and then at the lower level, focusing on, very specific kind of hands-on keyboard type of threats. Now, this is important, so I want to make sure that we're all clear. Any questions on the Intel requirements piece? Are there any questions? You guys are solid? Shy side of the room?
There could also
Good?
be like hierarchy to things, right? So for example, when you write your, it's called EEIs and SIRs, right? They also have like an order of like hierarchy. So if, for example, let's use the operational as an example, right? Actually, the first question that you might want to answer is actually this question. After you answer this question, then the sub-questions will be, if we got Hannah's identified as one of the adversaries, then you have this question. Then the other adversaries that you have identified, maybe your top 5, top 10, depending on your capacity and your coverage, you can list them. And then once this is done, the next steps, you will basically map it to your collection sources. And then you think about, okay, whether your collection sources that you are evaluating, can they answer these questions? Right? So there's a logic to the madness. It's not like the questions, we don't write questions for the sake of writing questions, right? So this will map to your collection requirements, your collection sources. Can these sources that you are getting, whether it's internal telemetry from the vendors, can they start to answer them? And then when you go into analysis, right, if you are depending on a third party for analysis, is the finished intelligence that you're getting from these vendors or providers answering those questions, right? If you are generating your own intelligence, you have a CTI analyst that's full-time job is to write reports. Are those analyses answering these questions? Right? So it always goes back to answering these questions, which is why this is the anchor of your entire CTI program. If you don't do this well, you don't do this right, everything that comes after is like, it's like Einstein, when you spend 80% of the time defining the problem, 80% of the time should be spent on doing this. Right? The remaining 20% will make complete sense if you do this properly. So I think we have to jump forward. So I think we'll jump all the way to the end. So actually you guys are missing out on 30 slides, but you can blame me on me. I think we go all the way to track modeling.
Sure.
Where's the mouse? Okay. Sorry to jump ahead. We have a lot of interesting stuff, but we're going to go down a lot of different rabbit holes if we go down that path, and we only have like 10 minutes left. So we will jump all the way to the end. And we'll do this. You want to do this or you want me to do this?
I don't care.
You do it.
Maybe I can get through it quicker.
Yeah.
All right. So threat modeling at the end of the day is really basically like, who do you need to worry about? And based on who you need to worry about, what do you need to worry about? Meaning, what are the capabilities that that particular adversary or those particular sets of adversaries, what capabilities are they going to wield when they're coming after your shit, right? So understanding like essentially every aspect of how they operate. I mean, we showed kind of part of that with like the diamond model, right? Like, outlining the capabilities, outlining the adversary, etc. But this is really about kind of putting it all together, putting the list of all of the adversaries that are likely to target you together into a model, and then ultimately aligning that model with your existing security controls. So talk about, like your entire security stack, talk about how you design the security controls on your endpoints, on your servers, what controls and what visibility do you have into the cloud, what do you have for identity, in terms of zero trust or whatever the hell it's called today. It seems like a different acronym or a different, buzzword every week, but, putting all of that together into a picture that allows you to understand the adversaries that are targeting you versus your security controls, and like, if, again, to plot that on a Venn diagram, what's the gap? What do you need to address as an organization in order to counteract the threat of the adversaries that you've just modeled? Because at the end of the day, that's the objective. It's not just to have some cool information and cool intelligence on adversaries and be like, wow, these guys are cool. They have like some, crazy tactics and crazy techniques and do some like really cool shit. That's, cool and interesting, but that's not the goal of the exercise. That's not the goal of investing in intelligence. The goal is to use intelligence to bolster your defenses. And by doing threat modeling, you'll be able to understand where the gaps are in your defenses that an adversary can leverage in order to gain access into your network and potentially, breach your mission critical goods, right? Whether that's dropping ransomware, whether that's stealing your intellectual property, whatever the case may be. Does that make sense? Like, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible just because of time.
And the point to note, just one point to add is that the reason why this is also a good place to end is because we just talked about PIRs, we just talked about intelligence requirements. A useful activity to do to help you generate your intelligence requirements is actually to derive your threat model. That's you'll see in the next couple of slides how the threat modeling general methodology will help you generate and derive your intelligence requirements, right? And then that leads on to all the other constituent activities that you will do in the intelligence program.
So, I mean, this is just like an example, right? Just some basic kind of common sense stuff. You got your organization, you got finance, personal, intellectual property, like the system itself, particularly the availability, brand reputation, you know, kind of like what the, I guess if you want to go back to the social engineering piece, or I'm sorry, the social media piece, you know, how does your organization look to the rest of the world, right? And as a threat modeling piece, it's like, you know, which adversaries are going to target which of those components, right? You may have, you know, this particular e-crime adversary that's going to target the finance or the personal system, but then you have, you know, some other adversaries that are going to target like your data center, right? So understanding like which adversary is going to target what component of your organization is also important, because, you know, if you think about segmentation and you think about different controls being applied across the estate, this will also help you understand where you need to modify your security posture in order to prevent those particular adversaries from being able to actually conduct those successful attacks, right? But this also allows you to understand what potentially are your intel requirements, right? As part of that threat modeling exercise, you can now understand that maybe scattered spider is somebody that you need to be concerned with, and scattered spider's TTPs are ABCXYZ. Same thing with Wicked Panda or Fancy Bear, or we're probably not going to see bears or, you know, the Russians here in the Philippines, but probably, you know, the North Koreans and the Chinese are something you need to worry about. Quite obviously the North Koreans, for, you know, if you remember the Bangladeshi incident. If you don't know, if you're not familiar with the Bangladeshi SWIFT attack, you should definitely read up on it, because the Philippines played a material role in that, whether they, you know, whether the country wanted to or not. Right? I don't know that I want to spend too much time on this, just because, like, I think this is probably not as interesting as the other piece. But yeah, we'll come back to this next year.
Oh, no time for an exercise.
Oh, we have no time for an exercise, but we do have 5 minutes left to have like open discussion and to answer any potential outstanding questions that maybe we didn't address because of the 30 slides that we skipped. But yeah, let's just kind of open it up. And I guess there's already a question.
So my question relates more, if you have similar technologies to another region, right, like US versus APAC.
Yeah, yeah.
If an organization is targeting like Siemens PLCs in APAC, should I still take note of that in the US?
This is a great question, and it actually comes back to like something that I'm very passionate about when talking with customers. Customers that I talk to quite often are very focused on their own country, their own geography, but that's not, generally speaking, not how adversaries operate. Adversaries operate kind of like that, targeting, you know, specific types of technology. Yeah,
find it everywhere.
right, exactly. Or they target specific industries. So just because maybe a particular spider hasn't attacked the Philippines yet, but has attacked, say, Europe or the Middle East, doesn't mean that they're not going to attack the Philippines. It doesn't mean you should not be concerned with them. You absolutely should be concerned with them if you operate in the same industry. So here's an example. You have an intersection in downtown Manila. Maybe there's a hospital on one side and a bank on the other side. There's going to be different threat models for both of those organizations, and there may be some overlap, but there's going to be different threat models. And the bank, doesn't necessarily need to be worried about what's going to be attacking the hospital, and vice versa. But the bank needs to be very cognizant of what attacks are happening in the Asian region, what attacks are happening in, say, Australia in the same industry, what attacks are happening in Europe in the same industry. You can't just have like that, like very small aperture focused on the Philippines, because if you do, as an example, you're going to miss a shit ton of intelligence that's going to help you better protect your network. So focus on your industry, focus on the same tech, especially if you're using very unique tech like you mentioned, like Siemens PLCs or Rockwell Automation, if you're like in that kind of business. If you're using standard kind of tech, probably becomes a little bit more better to focus on the industry and also the geography to a certain extent. But yeah, technology, especially that unique technology, is a good kind of focal point. And absolutely, if you're in the U.S. but you're seeing attacks to, say, Germany, definitely.
Unfortunately, it's like to El's point, there's a very strong correlation to how opportunistic adversaries are. So the notion of, if I find a vulnerability, if I can use it here, why don't I just spray and pray, right? Just use it on everything. So that's basically what happened during. If you guys are familiar with proxy logon, proxy shell, yeah, that's basically what happened, right? There's a known dynamics of Chinese adversaries sharing tooling with one another. Somebody found it. They shared with everyone, and then all of them just went at it. Regardless of whether the industry or the organization fit within that targeting scope, whether within their intelligence requirements, they just went after all of them. So that speaks to the vulnerability intelligence piece of things. You also want to keep track of vulnerability intelligence and mapping that to your tech stack.
Like Log4j as well.
Log4j as well, exactly.
Log4j, that was fun.
In fact, Log4j first, then proxy log on proxy shell. It's like a 4 months part.
Yeah, that was a terrible half a year. So I just want to drive that point home. When you're evaluating vendors for threat intelligence, don't just evaluate them on their effectiveness to provide you with Philippine-specific intelligence, because that's not going to give you the entire picture. You think about a puzzle. This may give you some of the puzzle pieces, but you need to have the view that's going to give you as many puzzle pieces as possible, and that may be a different vendor than you're kind of thinking about. So that was a great question, because that led to some solid discussion.
All right,
Shy side of the room? Yeah, maybe
last question.
Last question, shy side of the room.
That'll be a good question, I'm just kidding.
Speaking of counteracting, is there any way our organization can do sensor or at least minimize the intelligence that potential adversary can collect for our organization? Is there any service doing misinformation about us so that collecting information about our organization will be more difficult against for the adversaries?
I guess you're kind of talking about deception to a certain extent, but I think my first instinct to answer your question is to say it depends on the size of your organization and the capacity, right? If you're a small shop with little capacity, is it really going to be materially effective to spend time trying to deceive the adversary versus actually patching and mitigating the vulnerabilities that the adversaries are going to potentially leverage to gain access into your network? What's the opportunity cost there? It may be more important to just patch shit as opposed to trying to do something that sounds fun, deceive or screw around with the adversary. If you have a large shop with the capacity, maybe doing something like that could potentially be effective, but I don't know, maybe you have a different view. I don't know.
So aligned to what Scott said, right? You want to prioritize based on your context, right? So you want to begin, in my opinion, you want to think about this in the context of the adversary. So what the adversary would do to target the organization. So the first thing you want to do is you want to deter their ability to do reconnaissance, right? So the first thing you want to do, if you don't have any tools, is go and do a Shodan scan on your own environment, right? And see what's there, right? Then what's there, right? What's showing up, what's being said. So basically think about this from an external attack surface management piece. And then if capacity permits, you want to think about honeypots, right? And then honeypots where, right? You want to basically, if you want like lateral movement, you want to do honeypots like in your closed networks, right? But if you want to, again, depending on what you want to find, you might want to put honeypots on the DMZ. Right? So if you think that you have like a lot of shitty Apache web servers in your DMZ, then you might want to have like a honeypot. You want to create sinkholes like in different parts of the network. But that is very contingent on where you are. Because if you are already doing threat hunting in your environment, then you should be thinking about honeypots. If you are only just doing SOC operations, you're not even doing continuous monitoring, do that first, right? Then do the rest. Right? So it's a matter of
Like you got to start with the basics. Like master the basics before you start getting into kind of the intermediate and advanced things. And then also once you start talking about like honeypots, it also comes down to what's the organization's appetite for that kind of shit, because that starts getting into kind of like a treacherous area where you could actually end up putting yourself in more danger than you want to be, right? So yeah, just it's something to be cautious of. But I always would say master the basics before you start worrying about.
Before you start like basically playing with your lawyers, you better
Yeah.
get the basics right. Because once you go to honeypots, the lawyers are coming in.
Yeah. And like, there's always room for mastering the basics. Like, there's always room to improve the simple things. And that low-hanging fruit is what the adversary is gonna get you with. I think they say when the most accidents occur when driving a vehicle occur within just a few blocks from home. It's because like you're like, I'm driving on this residential neighborhood and I don't need to pay attention. I don't need to wear my seatbelt, for example, and that's when the accidents occur. And that kind of is just a metaphor for like, do the basics, master the basics, do the simple things, and get that low-hanging fruit to not be low-hanging fruit any longer. Don't give the adversary any simple things to hit. Make it hard. Make it difficult. All right. I think that ends our.
You already got red carded, didn't you?
I got red carded?
Yeah, you just didn't see.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming today.
Thank you very much.
I think there's a ferret slide.
Oh, nice.
Hi.